Okay, this video is about training principles. The kids are in bed, so we won't have any cameo appearances from them. Here is the study design. You can see in highlighted in red the parts that we're going to look at today. We're looking at the training principles. So these are the guidelines that we use to design programs so that we can enhance those fitness components. So, So when we're writing programs, we have to consider what type of methods are we going to use, such as continuous training, weight resistance training, but also what are the guidelines, what are the principles that help us to determine how much weight or how many times that we do things or how far we do things. So they're the training principles. The acronym that I like to use is DOFUS. These are the 5 most critical training principles: duration, overload, frequency, intensity, and specificity. Every training program needs to adhere to these training principles to bring about those chronic adaptations, those long-lasting physiological changes to the body to improve performance. We also have some other training principles: maintenance, individuality, diminishing returns, variety, and detraining. We also need to understand these principles so that we can structure our training accordingly. So the first one, duration. Well, duration is how long either the program is. It could be 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 12 months. Duration also can refer to the session itself. So is it a 20-minute session, 60-minute session? What's important to understand is that to bring about chronic adaptations, they're the long-lasting changes. If we're training the aerobic system, we need to train for a duration of a minimum of 20 minutes. Okay, so that's, I guess, your guideline for how long to make your training sessions. Now remember, for beginners, 20 minutes may not be jogging continuously for 20 minutes. That might be interspersed by some walking. And in time, those walks would get fewer and the running sections would get longer, so that the individual could run for at least 20 minutes. Okay, another important aspect of duration is what's called tapering. This is a very important part of a training program as the athlete peaks to their sorry, I'm tired. When they reach their physiological peak at the time when they're due to race or compete. So if you have a look at this table, this shows about a 6-month schedule of training, and it's all based around competition. So the competition here: Australian Championships, Vic Champs, World Champs. Okay, obviously these latter two are more important. The tapering is what we're looking at. So just prior, in the week, or the 2 weeks prior to the Oz Champs, there's a specific duration of time dedicated to tapering, which is where you reduce the volume of training. So you'll either reduce the distance or the amount of time that you spend training, to allow your body to adapt, to get strong, recover, and be in peak form to compete in the competition. Okay, next one, overload. This is probably one of my favourites. Progressive overload is what it's called. Progressive means add a little bit extra each time. So overload, in order to improve, in order for your body to change, for that left ventricle to get bigger, for you to increase the amount of capillaries in your body to help deliver more blood to those working muscles, you need to stress the body, you need to load the body so that it can cause changes to be able to cope with that increase in intensity. So overload is just increasing either the intensity or the duration or the frequency, but one at a time, so that the body has to adapt. A lot of people get all excited and they start a training program and they run 5Ks one week, and then the next week they're running faster, they're running further, and they're running more times a week. That's too much. The principle of overload is that you just overload one factor at a time. So say you run 3 times a week and you run 5K, 5K and 5K 3 times a week. The following week you should either overload the distance, so you run 5K, 5K and 6K, or you run 5K, 5K, 5K and you overload the intensity and maybe add a 3K. Or you could maybe run your 5K, 5K, but in this 5K you might run it faster. So, but what you don't do is you don't run them faster, add an extra training session and run further in one of them. So you just overload one of the principles of time, either duration, the length of time that you run, or the intensity, so the speed. You might choose to go faster, or you might add a frequency, add an extra session, but you don't do all of them in 1 week. And the last most important thing with overload is that you don't increase more than 10%. I need to change the color. I'm not happy with this color. I want red. Yeah, that's better. So no more than 10%. If you do your 5K, 5K and then jump to 10K, so sorry, you went 5K, 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 and the following week you go 5K, 5K, 10K, that's increasing too much. That's doubling, that's increasing by 100% in terms of distance or duration. So it's very important not to overload by more than 10% a week, because the consequence will be injury or illness, because the body cannot adapt that quickly. If you look down the bottom, there is a graph outlining the need to stress the body. So the bottom section is fatigue, and that's where you tire the body, you stress the body, you load the body. If you do that the right amount, not too much too soon, then your body will adapt and the performance will increase. We'll get a higher performance. If you choose to overload too much and you are increasing duration, intensity or frequency by more than about 10%, you won't adapt. Your performance won't go high. You will not improve. Okay, so this is a problem with many athletes. They train either too hard or too much, and their bodies can't adapt, and it doesn't result in better performance. Conversely, if you don't load enough, if you don't stress your body, you just do your 5K, 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 and the next week 5K, 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 5K. If you never load the body, if you never increase the speed or the duration or the frequency, your performance will stay the same. You won't get any faster. Some people say, oh, I've been running for 6 months and haven't improved. That's because they've not increased or overloaded in either duration, intensity, or frequency. This is a great graph to show how important recovery, what we do post-training, is important for also our adaptations, our chronic changes that we cause through training. As you can see from the dotted line, if we recover well and we fuel our bodies appropriately, we will adapt a little bit quicker and we will also reach a higher level. So recovery is important to get the most out of your training, as well as getting those changes quicker. All right, frequency. This is easy. You know frequency. It's the number of times that you train, either per week or per month. The key principles here is, if you want to maintain your fitness, you need to train twice. If you want to improve, if you want to get bring about chronic changes, long-lasting changes, you need to train at least 3 times. More elite athletes will clearly do more than 3, and this is because they might break their day into 2 sessions, or for example, weight trainers might do lower body one day and then upper body the other, so they can incorporate more training sessions, but they tailor it so that they're not fatiguing too much, and they're keeping a balance. Okay, intensity. All right, intensity is how hard we're working, and there are different ways to monitor this, or to track this. We can use heart rate monitors. We can use GPS units that can track our speed and tell us how fast we're working, accelerometers. However, probably one of the most popular ways is called RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. So rate of perceived exertion is just perceive as how you feel. So a 7 out of 10, you're working quite hard. So the next slide shows you the different intensity levels. It's out of 10. Okay, so obviously 10 out of 10, you're working anaerobically, you're at 100% maximal. All right, the important thing here with intensity is knowing what percentage of heart rate max is aerobic, lip training, that lactate inflection point, or completely anaerobic. So have a look at this graph. This is important. For aerobic training, or where we use things like continuous methods or fartlek methods of training, so if you want to develop your aerobic capacity, so that's your body's ability to take in, transport and utilize oxygen, then the appropriate intensity, the appropriate effort is 70 to 85% of heart rate max. That's really important, and that helps us structure our training program. If we are aiming to train the aerobic system, that's the intensity range that we need to stick to. If we're training above that, well, we're not training the aerobic system. We're using carbohydrates as the only fuel source. We're working the anaerobic energy systems. The next one, lip. Let me use a different colour for that one. Let's use green. So, lip. Oh, how come that's not changing? I don't know. Green. No, not working. Okay. Remember the lactate inflection point where boop, it goes up like that? The point beyond which lactate accumulation exceeds the removal. So the intensity, if you want to improve that, if you want to delay the point at which that lactate inflection point occurs, okay, so you can go harder for longer, you can work aerobically at a faster intensity before you hit that point of where you start fatiguing. You need to, the intensity, how hard you work, needs to be about 85 to 87% of heart rate max. This graph says 85 to 90% of heart rate max. So that's like you're on the verge of accumulating the metabolic byproducts that will fatigue you. Finally, anaerobically, if we're using no oxygen, we're using the anaerobic energy system, so that's anaerobic glycolysis and ATP CP system. That's an intensity of, over 90%. Okay, this graph says table says 85 and above, yeah, I would stick to more about 90% and above, because your lip can be anywhere between 85 and 90 depending on the athlete. Alright, so they're the percentage of heart rate max intensities for the these three training zones. This table just shows us our RPE, rate of perceived exertion. What's important to note with intensity is that particularly when we're working anaerobically, our heart rate monitors won't necessarily indicate that we're working 100%. For example, if those sprints that we were doing the other day, we were maximally sprinting, that short interval training. But if we were wearing heart rate monitors, it wouldn't have shown, 180 beats per minute, because it takes our cardiovascular and our respiratory systems time to catch up, to the effort. So that's why heart rate monitors are not always an accurate reflection of intensity, particularly for the much shorter activities. Alright, so we've covered DOFIS, the DOFIS, duration, overload, frequency, intensity. The last one, specificity, DOFIS. Specificity, this is where you're training. This is the guideline that when you train, when you do all your different methods of training, it must replicate the demands of the sport, such as work to rest ratios. Okay, if you are doing some interval training, you need to match the work to rest ratio to that of what you analysed in your sport. Remember, with netball, we discovered a 1 to 2 work to rest ratio. So when we do our long and medium interval training, we'll use a 1 to 2 work to rest ratio, because that we found was very specific to the netball centre that we analysed. The other thing that needs to be specific is when we're training is to make sure we're training the appropriate energy systems, the right fitness components, and also the major muscle groups. So if we've identified certain muscles as being important in a movement, then when we do our weight resistance program, we need to make the exercises that we choose very specific to the muscles that we analysed as being dominant in that sport. Okay, these are the other training principles that are also important. Maintenance, we went over this before with frequency. Many athletes in the off season don't want to lose all the gains that they've made throughout the season. So to maintain your fitness levels, so to not lose all those chronic adaptations, you need to train for twice a week. And remember, you need 3 to make improvements. Individuality. We're all different. God created us all very uniquely, and we therefore need to train to our individuality. So an example of this might be, I love to run on trails. So that would be something I would incorporate in my training program. Whereas my husband, he loves to train on hard surfaces. He likes roads. So we would tailor that program a little bit differently. Some individuals prefer not to go in water, so we would choose alternative training for that athlete. So individuality is tailoring the program specifically for that individual, and that can be based on their likes, their dislikes. It could be injuries or particular physiological needs that they have, or idiosyncrasies that they have. Okay, diminishing returns. Diminishing returns is, simply put, is the closer you get to your genetic potential, the smaller the gains you get. If you think of the biggest loser, you know, the people that are overweight the most, when they start out their change of lifestyle and changing their eating habits, they lose a lot of weight very quickly. Whereas someone who's smaller that changes, they don't lose as much. It's the same with this. The fitter you are, the closer you are to your genetic potential, the best that you can be, the smaller gains you'll get for your training. So when a beginner starts training, you know, they improve a lot really quickly. But as they get better and better and better and better, they often do more training, but they only see smaller improvements. Okay, variety. This is variety adds spice. So this is making it fun, changing the training program so that you don't get bored. So you might choose to, train in a different environment so that it's stimulating and new and interesting. It could be a different activity which calls upon different muscle groups that can also help with stressing muscles in different ways to keep them adapting and improving. And this is the last one. This is detraining. Another word for detraining is reversibility. This is simply when you stop training, you lose those gains that you've made. So when that left ventricle gets bigger from all your aerobic training, if you stop training, it will get smaller. It often takes weeks to go down. However, you lose that fitness much quicker than it took to gain. So that's the unfortunate thing, that when you do stop, you will lose your gains quicker than you attained them. And that's why in the off season, so that athletes don't detrain and go backwards, they train twice a week to maintain. Remember, that's